But that led me to believe over time that prayer doesn't work. Prayer doesn't work. He doesn't answer prayers. And it wasn't until I understood that I was asking him to submit to my will rather than me submitting to his will. That was a cognitive dissonance that I was experiencing. And that led to great confusion for me because I didn't understand that my confusion around who God was and what my role is in this world, that confusion led me to think that, oh, well, I believe in this, but I don't really believe in this. Like, God is a nice thing to talk about, but do I truly believe that he has the world and that he's interactive? I said yes because I was a Christian, but I don't think I really believed that. I think deep down. I'm thrilled you're here with us on The Christian Clinician, where we join faith with evidence-based medicine to revitalize your health and renew your faith. Get ready for real and informative conversations with wellness experts and Christian scholars alike to gain a deeper understanding of our faith, explore our God-given purpose, and discover how the strength of our relationship with God can impact our health here on earth. Welcome to another episode of The Christian Clinician. I'm your host, Tanya Paynter, and today I have a question for you. Have you ever considered how your unconscious beliefs about God might impact how you view the world? How they may contribute not only to your emotional health, but your physical health? Today, I want to unpack this concept a bit and see if we can correlate how our beliefs about God might impact our health and our symptoms. So, this is something that I've been praying on recently, the idea that our physical symptoms are actually arising from subconscious disharmony in our understanding of God and the world around us. When we don't have a solid understanding of who he is and our identity in him, those doubts can cause an unstable, unconscious belief system that prevents us from making sense of all the nonsense happening in the world right now. That leads to anxiety and depression, and this constant stress caused by this emotional upheaval can eventually begin to affect our physical body, manifesting in physical pain and symptoms, and including, increasing cancer rates, heart disease, autoimmunity, and all kinds of things that we see running rampant in our society right now. So there's some interesting research around not only how our emotional states affect our physical body, but also how our spiritual health impacts our physical and mental health. And there's actually some research supporting this theory that an imbalanced understanding of God correlates with increased anxiety and depression. So, to get started on this conversation, let's take a little look at unconscious beliefs. How do we filter our world through our unconscious beliefs? How do they form? And what happens when our unconscious beliefs contradict our conscious ones? So, there was an article published in 2008 in the Perspectives on Psychological Science journal. And in it, it discusses kind of the evolutionary way that we develop unconscious beliefs. Now, I will use the caveat that this is a completely secular scientific journal, and it is strictly looking at things from an evolutionary standpoint. But it does help us to understand how our brains are wired and how our genes contribute to the way that we are able to develop these unconscious beliefs. So I think this is really valuable information for us to understand. So what this article says, and I will link it in the show notes, is that a lot of what we do every day happens without us even thinking about it. So over the past 25 years, social science researchers have been studying these unconscious behaviors, and they've actually found some really fascinating results. So we used to think that our genes gave us hardwired reactions to certain things in life, but now we know that instead of giving us fixed responses, our genes give us flexible tendencies. So this means that we can adapt to different situations based on our environment. And it's not just the big cultural norms that we pick up as we grow, but we also absorb habits and beliefs and behaviors from the people closest to us. So we're learning from our family and our close friends. And so this fine tuning helps us to navigate through life with more ease. And part of what we are doing as we're growing this developmental phase, even as young as an infant, we're starting to process our external environment, and we're formulating our own belief system based on what we're witnessing. So if we're seeing, a lot of love and a healthy family dynamic, then we start to incorporate that and we start seeing the world through those belief systems that people are loving and good and kind. If, on the other hand, we're exposed to traumas and traumatic events and things are scary, we start to develop these protective mechanisms, right? And these are all underlying fundamental beliefs that we're not even aware that we're developing. So this is all happening on a subconscious level. So this is nothing that we have control over. It is simply us absorbing what we're observing from our environment and incorporating that into our belief system. So there is something called contextual priming, where I'll use an example. Imagine that you walk into a room and there are people who are happy and talking excitedly, and then you start to feel happy and excited and cheerful, and you're not even really a part of what's going on, right? You're just walking in there and you're observing the environment in which you walked into. So you start to feel the emotions associated with what you're observing. So, this is an example of contextual priming, and this starts to happen from birth. So, babies are imitating what they see adults do because of these automatic connections between what they're observing and how they respond. So, as they grow, these connections become stronger and will shape how they act in different situations. It's easy to see that we often will act before we reflect on our actions. So, we act before we think instead of thinking before we act. So the conscious mind will step in afterwards to make sense of what just happened and how you interacted. And so, this doesn't mean that we're robots just acting on autopilot, but instead it highlights how our unconscious mind plays a big role in guiding our behaviors and oftentimes without us even realizing it. So, understanding this about ourselves and the way our brain is wired, it brings to mind for me the statement that Paul made in Romans when he said, "For I do not understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate." So that's in Romans 7:15. And it really kind of strikes at how important our underlying beliefs are and the ways that our experiences as young children and all through our lives can impact our belief about the world around us. So what happens when we have conflicting beliefs? What happens when we have beliefs that we think consciously, and those actually conflict with our unconscious or subconscious beliefs? And this can be about a particular situation, it can be about a moral value, it could be about God Himself. So then we're living with a level of subconscious confusion all the time. This is called cognitive dissonance. And when our conscious actions and our conscious thoughts don't line up with the value of our subconscious beliefs, then we're at this cognitive dissonance. We don't understand why we are always feeling uptight and like something is wrong. And it can be because that we are not acting in the way that our unconscious beliefs would have us act. And this can be very confusing because what ends up happening is that our brain prioritizes the belief that's most deeply ingrained or relevant to the situation at hand. And so this can conflict with another belief that we hold, and again, even a conscious belief. And that leads to this cognitive dissonance if the conflict becomes dominant or comes to the surface. And then we start experiencing anxiety and confusion. And so this is where, our understanding about God and who He is can really lie at the base of a lot of these conflicts. Because if we are Christians and we're following God and we're following, we go to church and we do all the things that we're supposed to be doing as Christians, but we're not addressing doubts that we have. So this is something that I experienced personally when I was going through my spiritual struggles. Is I was a Christian. I claimed that I believed in God and Jesus and the resurrection and miracles and the Bible. And I said all those things. And yet, when I stopped to think about how do I believe, I realized that I didn't. I didn't. I said I did, but I did not. I did not believe that miracles actually happened because I would pray as a child or I would pray through my adult life. And of course, I would pray for selfish things, right? I would be praying for, I would was using God as a genie in a bottle, right? I wanted something, I asked him for it, and he didn't give it to me because that's not the way that it works. But that led me to believe over time that prayer doesn't work. Prayer doesn't work. He doesn't answer prayers. And it wasn't until I understood that I was asking him to submit to my will rather than me submitting to his will. That was a cognitive dissonance that I was experiencing. And that led to great confusion for me because I didn't understand that my confusion around who God was and what my role is in this world, that confusion led me to think that, oh, well, I believe in this, but I don't really believe in this. Like, God is a nice thing to talk about, but do I truly believe that He has the world and that He's interactive? I said yes because I was a Christian, but I don't think I really believed that. I think deep down, I thought that
Well, I don't even know what I thought, to be honest with you. I'm not sure if I actually did believe in God at that point. I don't even know if I was saved. I said I was, I thought I was. Now I'm not quite so sure. Now I know that I am, but I am in a completely different place in my understanding of who God was. And it wasn't until I went through that spiritual struggle in 2023 that I fully understood I don't know who God is at all. My understanding of who he is was based on people telling me one thing and me learning about evolution and science and going to school and the university and very secular nature. And so, how could I believe in creation and believe in evolution? How could I believe that, the Big Bang was true and that Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden was true? So I had all of these cognitive dissonances. I had all of these things happening under the surface that I wasn't even consciously aware of, which led to a lot of confusion. And once I sat down to actually say, all right, how do I believe in God? What do I have doubts about? It wasn't until I started to confess those doubts, first to myself, right? And then to other people, mostly my family. But, there is a lot of guilt. There is a lot of stigma around confessing these doubts. And I say confessing because it does almost feel like it's a sinful act to say, oh, I have these doubts about God and who he is and the truth of things. And is the Bible really true? Like, I didn't know if the Bible was actually true or if it was just for the longest time, I thought it was just a collection of stories meant to kind of give us a good moral basis. I now realize how wrong I was, but I held that belief for most of my life. And it hasn't been until the last 5 to 6 years that I really started to understand that the Bible is a lot more than that. And so, again, here I am calling myself a Christian my whole life, and yet I had a completely confused idea of God and everything about him and who he was. And that led from my misunderstandings as I grew up, what God's role in my life was and who I was in him. And so it wasn't until I was actually able to sit down and I didn't, I've shared before, I have not actually, I didn't reach out to anybody in my church or, any of my close friends who were all Christian and tell them about any of this because I was ashamed and I thought that I was sinful and that I was a bad person. And and I don't feel that we necessarily, as Christians, do a great job in encouraging this conversation. Nobody wants to admit that they have doubts, but we all have them. And so it's really important for us to start talking more openly about it because if you have a doubt, your friend has a doubt. And maybe they've never felt safe to be able to talk about it. So, it takes a brave person to make that first step and to start engaging in, all right, you know what? I'm not exactly sure if I truly believe that the Bible is actually legit from God. Let's see where I can get this information from. And there's plenty of it out there. And that's part of what I really want to do in this podcast is to be able to provide some of that. So doing some apologetics, but in the bigger context of understanding that as we grow closer to God and understanding who he is, that this cognitive dissonance that we may carry with us, our unconscious beliefs and our misunderstandings about who God is, that we can come to an understanding, a better understanding. And so that our actions and our conscious behaviors are really meshing with our unconscious beliefs. And that's the true goal is that our unconscious beliefs that we are absolutely certain in, and this is how we see the world, this is where we really need to do a lot of our work. So, how do we do unconscious work, right? How do we fix some of this cognitive dissonance when we say one thing and we do another thing? And then we're like, I don't understand why I just did what I did. That is a cognitive dissonance. And Paul was expressing that in Romans when he was saying, I don't understand why I do these things when I don't want to do them. And the things that I do want to do, I can't do. That's part of the human condition, right? We all struggle with that. But taking it a little bit deeper, let's take a look at how this emotional issue can come to play in physical stress. So, if we have this confused understanding of who God is, and we aren't secure in understanding who we are in him, then we're left to kind of float along with the tide, right? This is where our solid foundation is so important. And this really came true for me when I started to uncover some of these weird beliefs that I have, and I'm still working through them, right? There are still things that I struggle with, and I haven't been able to make sense of, Adam and Eve versus evolution and how that all fits together. Because I know deep down, one of my core beliefs is I understand that if God is real, then the things that we're observing in the natural world will fit into what he's telling us in the Bible. So there's something um, that we are misunderstanding, whether that is the theory of evolution, and that's, we're misreading what all of this information and the scientific discoveries are. And now I'm understanding how much there is a gap in our understanding of that evolutionary process. Or is it that we're interpreting, the first part of Genesis wrong? And maybe, I don't know. I'm not ready to get into that conversation. My point is, though, that my a core belief that I now truly hold that flipped for me in 2023 is the fact that I know that without a doubt, the Bible is absolutely written by God as it states that it is, and that has to guide everything that we're doing. So now I understand that the observations that we're making in the physical world have to line up in one way or another with what God has told us in the Bible. So what that looks like yet, I don't know. I'm still working through that, but I do know that my guiding light is the Bible. I know that my guiding light is who I am in Christ. And so once I start to build everything on that solid foundation, suddenly the anxiety that I was feeling over some of these things that I just wasn't even aware was an issue for me started to resolve, right? And this is where that peace beyond all understanding, I think, is starting to stem from, at least for me. Well, it comes from the Holy Spirit, but as I'm growing in my relationship with God and who he is, then I'm starting to feel this underlying peace that, comes from just resting in my knowledge of him and just allowing that the Holy Spirit to be carrying me in all of these things that I'm struggling to understand. As long as I know that he is truth, everything else can just kind of wash around and I'll make sense of it eventually. And I know that I still have a lot of work to do in this area. But for now, just knowing that those things are real and that he is truth is enough to give me that calming peace that I need, right? So it's a gift from the Holy Spirit, and it's also something we can work towards as well, along with his help. But I digress. So I wanted to come back and talk about how our physical bodies will respond to this emotional turmoil. So if we have this unstable spiritual life where we don't quite understand who he is or what we believe about him or what we believe in general, then we're starting to be tossed around. We're stable. We don't have that solid foundation. And then we start to experience anxiety. And a lot of times that's accompanied with depression as well, because we can't make sense of the world around us, especially as all of the things that are happening are happening. And that manifests physically in our body as elevated cortisol levels, as elevated catecholamine neurotransmitters. And those things are very pro-inflammatory, they are immune suppressive, they just mess up all kinds of things in our body, right? We can see elevated cortisol levels have been implicated in chronic pain syndromes, in migraines, in cardiovascular disease, in cancers. I mean, we can go down the list, and cortisol can affect all body systems. And so, regardless of what we are dealing with on a physical level, there can be some level of involvement of stress and chronic elevation of cortisol that can contribute to those symptoms. So what does that mean for those physical symptoms? Well, we go in, once we're in that physical pain, that's when we seek out, medical help. And we take medications and all these other things, which is great. If we need those, then we should use them. They are tools, but they should not be what we rely on 100%. And this brings up something else that I've thought about before, is that I realized for me that my supplements, the things that I was using to treat my physical symptoms, had become an idol to me because I was relying on that as opposed to relying on God. And when I made that realization, my goodness, everything changed. I stopped taking, I was taking upwards of 15 supplements almost every day. And when I realized that this was something I was doing, that as soon as I would feel some pain or some discomfort, and I would turn to, okay, what supplement can I take? He convicted me in that, and I was not allowed to take supplements for a good couple of weeks, And I had to rely solely on him. And then slowly, I started to understand like I was chasing these physical symptoms when in reality the underlying issue was my relationship with him. And so as I started to focus in on him, now I'm able to, I pray about it every time. Hey God, I'm struggling with this pain. I'm starting to have a headache. What do I need to do with this? Right? I'm checking in with him. Sometimes it's, you need to spend some time in the Bible with me. Let's talk. And I'll go sit and pray. And then miraculously, when I'm done praying, my headache's gone. But then sometimes, it's like, yeah, maybe a curcumin sounds good. I'm going to go take that. All right, fantastic. So as long as I'm checking in with him, he tells me, what do I need? And that's a way that I'm starting to build my life. I'm not great at it. I do it maybe 20% of the time, if I'm being completely honest. But those times that I remember to do it, I realize how important it is that I'm turning to him first, and then he'll allow me to use the other tools that I have. And so this comes back to the idea that when we go into the doctor and we're given these medications or supplements or dietary changes and lifestyle stuff, whatever, all of that is great, but it never includes God. And that should be the very first place that we turn to, is trying to understand who he is and what we believe about him, and then turning to him for guidance in all of the rest of it. So, I do want to make an important note. I've talked a lot about how our beliefs and our doubts can impact our emotional state. I'm not saying that all anxiety or depression will be a result of this. Sometimes we go through hard times in life. Sometimes we have stress. Sometimes we have physical pain and issues that is contributing to our anxiety, depression. Sometimes we have hormonal imbalances. Sometimes it's a side effect of medications or exposure to toxins or what have you. We also live in a world where we are bombarded with all kinds of stuff, emotional stressors, physical stressors, you name it. And when that's the case, obviously, we do need to seek that medical treatment so that we can address the appropriate thing. But we also need to make sure that we're including God in this conversation, right? And understanding, is some of this caused because of my misunderstanding of who God is? Is my relationship with him good? Is this something completely not related to my relationship, my spiritual health? Because in my opinion, we have our healthcare system completely backwards. Instead of addressing physical issues, which is what we always address, and then sometimes we address the emotional issues, right? That's becoming a little bit more well known. And now anxiety and depression is something that we treat for, that we know can impact pain levels and physical symptoms. But I have never, ever gone into a doctor's office and had somebody ask me about my religion, my spiritual health, my relationship with God. And so I think that if we were to flip that on our head and make our relationship with God the most important thing, and then we would start to see in alignment with that, that our emotions will change and our physical health will change as well. And of course, we are also there to support the physical and emotional piece because we can do that, right? Doctors can do that. We have a ton of knowledge about how the human body works and ways we can support it. And that absolutely should be a piece of the whole puzzle. But we can't do it solely without God, because if we do it without our relationship with him, then we will never have that firm foundation that we need to build the rest of our life on. And then we will constantly be chasing physical symptoms that are manifesting as a result of our spiritual unhealth. So that was the main point that I wanted to make. And there was a conversation that I had with a friend, and she does not believe in God, but she does believe in ghosts and spiritual aspects. And when I asked about that, because I didn't know how you could have spiritual without having, a God, um, she said, I don't really know. And that got me to thinking that there are a lot of people who don't really understand what they believe and why they believe it. So that led me down the kind of the rabbit hole of, have we ever looked into this scientifically? Do we have research on what people believe, why they believe it, and how that manifests in symptoms of anxiety and depression? And I specifically focused in on that because so much of our physical symptoms have an emotional component to it, right? So if we are working on our emotional fortitude, a lot of times we'll see improvement in our physical symptoms as well. Not always, but in my experience, in most cases. And so I started to look at the research, and there was a very interesting study done in 2020 on the Journal of Religious Health called Worldview Under Stress. And again, I'll link that in the show notes. But what it was talking about was taking a look at people's blood pressure, heart rate, and cortisol levels. So they were assessed at baseline. They were assessed immediately after stress testing and then after recovery period. And they were comparing 3 different groups. So they were looking at people who were religious, and they didn't specify if it was Christian or Islam or, Mormon or what it was. It just was religious. So people who believed what they believed and they understood what they believed for the most part, right? And then they tested atheists, so people who didn't believe that there was any God, like what we see is what we get. And then there was a spiritual component. So these were people more new age, right? That the universe or maybe more Buddhist or just somebody who really didn't focus in on a God per se or a personal God. It was just more universal and love and light and that kind of idea. So I'll read you what the findings were. Worldview comparisons showed lower cardiovascular stress responses among religious people than among the atheists or the spiritual people. They found a particularly high baseline cortisol levels among spiritual people. So these were people who kind of the new age belief of almost whatever it is that you want to believe in, right? There's no rhyme or reason in a lot of cases. People don't really even know what they believe in. They just hear this universal, mishmash of whatever. So that was very interesting to me. I mean, the fact that atheists, they know what they believe, right? They're firm in that foundation. They believe that there is no God and they know it. And they had less stress than the people who didn't quite know what they believed in, right? Universe or whatever it is. So ultimately what they found was that, and their final findings state, the findings of this study suggest that worldview security, knowing what you believe and why you believe it, might partly explain the health benefits often associated with religion. And you can think of atheism as its own religion, right? Because they're very firm in their foundation of there being no God. So that is a faith in and of itself. So it's that kind of sparked my interest in this topic of really digging deep. So I want to challenge you to really sit and think deeply and without judgment on what do you really believe? I mean, it's a very scary exercise, but God knows your heart. So if in your heart you don't believe that he answers prayers, he already knows you think that. So you're not admitting anything that he doesn't already know. But if you can find in yourself that you hold this belief, now we have something to work with, right? You can do the same thing with what do you think about the Bible? Do you really legit think that it is the word of God written by man? Do you believe that it's infallible? Do you believe that there's mistakes in it? Do you believe it with 100% guarantee that this is what God meant? Or do you have some questions about that? Are there some doubts that are in there? And it's okay if you have those because now you know that you have doubts about this and you can go explore the evidence that we have and change those unconscious beliefs. So if this topic resonated with you, if it kind of struck a chord, I would love to hear from you. This is something that I've been praying on for the last few weeks, and I'm really interested to kind of hear opinions about if this makes sense. If does it seem like something that strikes true for you? Are there flaws in it that I haven't thought about? So you can always email me at support@psalmmedical.com, or you can DM me on Facebook or Instagram. So if you're watching on YouTube and this was something that you enjoyed, I'd appreciate a subscribe and a like, and I will see you next week. Thank you for listening to our podcast. Please subscribe for more topics like this, where we focus on bringing our faith and health together for a whole you. If you have questions around your health or your faith, including doubts and struggles with what you've been taught about God, we'd love to have you send us an email at support@psalmmedical.com.